Your daughter can't wear those shorts here. It violates community standards." Patricia Klein's voice carried across the pool deck like a gavel, sharp and smug. Sophia froze, clutching her towel tighter, her cheeks burning while the other kids stared. Patricia stood with her clipboard angled like a weapon, her expression one of triumph, as though humiliating a teenager was her civic duty. I took the violation letter from her hand without flinching. The ink wasn't even dry, but my words cut sharper than any pen stroke. "You're citing rules that don't exist, and I know that because I enforce the law for a living. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back." She smirked, the kind of grin people wear when they believe they've already won, but she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I wasn't just another father too tired to argue. I was Daniel Ruiz, district attorney for the county, and I knew exactly how far her so-called authority reached and where it collapsed. But this wasn't about titles or courtroom victories. This was about Sophia. The pool wasn't just water and concrete. It was the place where my late wife had taught our daughter to swim, years before illness stole her from us. It was the one spot where Sophia still felt her mother's presence, where laughter had once echoed under the Florida sun. And now, Patricia wanted to stain that memory with shame. I saw Sophia's eyes brim with tears as she turned away, her shoulders collapsing inward. That moment carved into me deeper than any case file I'd ever read. It wasn't about clothing. It was about dignity, about letting my daughter feel safe in the space tied to her mother's legacy. Patricia had no idea she'd crossed into sacred ground. My hands tightened on the violation letter. The poolside noise blurred, the splash of water, the chatter of kids, the whistle of a lifeguard. All I could hear was Sophia's silence, the silence of a girl who didn't deserve to be made small. That was when I made my decision. Patricia thought this was a simple power play, a chance to prove she ran Cypress Grove Estates with an iron fist. She had no idea she'd just provoked the one homeowner who knew the law better than she knew her own bylaws. Where are you watching from? Because what happened next wasn't just another HOA squabble. It was the beginning of a fight that would shake this neighborhood to its core. And Patricia Klein had no idea she had chosen the wrong man, the wrong family, and the wrong legacy to mess with. Patricia's heels clicked away from the pool deck like a judge exiting the bench, certain she had delivered her final verdict. But her voice still echoed in my head as I wrapped Sophia in a towel and walked her home. She kept her eyes down the whole way, refusing to meet mine, the sting of humiliation fresh on her skin. I promised myself I wouldn't let that scene repeat. A few nights later, one of my neighbors invited us to a small cookout. Burgers hissed on the grill, and laughter floated above the hum of cicadas. I could see Sophia relax a little, at least until Patricia's name came up. That was when the mood shifted, like a cloud rolling in. I didn't even have to ask. The stories came spilling out. "She fined me for hanging wind chimes," one woman muttered, keeping her voice low, as if Patricia could materialize at the gate. "Said it violated some noise policy." "There's no policy." Another neighbor leaned in, shaking his head. "She threatened to tow my son's car for being parked on the street overnight." It wasn't even his car. He was borrowing mine. I checked the bylaws. No rule against it. Each voice carried the same mixture of bitterness and fear. They all hated the constant harassment, but none of them had challenged it. Patricia had learned to wield intimidation like a weapon, and most people simply folded. I listened, careful not to reveal my plan just yet. What I needed now was a fuller picture, patterns, habits, a track record of abuse. And what I was hearing was exactly that. Patricia didn't just overstep with Sophia. She'd been bending rules and inventing them for years, turning a community into her personal fiefdom. Sophia sat close to me, silent, but I noticed her listening too. Every new story drew her shoulders a little higher, as if she realized she wasn't alone. Other families had been humiliated, other children had been made to feel small. That mattered. One man, gray hair, calloused hands, spoke with the weight of someone long resigned. "She came after me for planting a rosebush in the front yard, claimed it violated the landscaping guidelines. My wife planted roses at every home we ever lived in. She passed away last spring." His eyes dropped. I let Patricia dig them up. Couldn't fight anymore. That hit me hard. I felt the same knot in my chest that I'd felt when Sophia turned her face from me at the pool. loss layered on loss, until the very places meant to hold our memories became hostile. As the night deepened, the stories kept coming. One couple whispered that Patricia had threatened to revoke their pool privileges when they questioned her. Another admitted she'd fined them for a seasonal display because their daughter painted the driveway in chalk. Nothing about it was official, but the threat of escalation was always enough. It became clear. Patricia thrived not on authority, but on fear, and fear spread in silence. I made small talk, smiled when I had to, but my mind was racing. Each account was another thread weaving into a rope I could pull. I didn't need to invent a case against Patricia. She'd built it herself, violation by violation, bluff by bluff. All I had to do was shine a light on the cracks. By the time we left, Sophia's hand slipped into mine, tighter than before. She didn't say much, but I knew she was watching me, waiting to see if I would do what the others hadn't. Walking home under the glow of the streetlights, I looked at the tidy lawns and manicured hedges Patricia had claimed to protect. They felt less like community standards and more like walls she used to cage people. I wasn't interested in living in a cage. That night, I placed Patricia's letter on my desk. It sat next to my wife's photo, her smile forever frozen in the frame. I traced the edge of the picture, then glanced back at the so-called violation. One was a reminder of everything worth fighting for. The other was the spark that had just lit the fire. Patricia believed she ruled Cypress Grove Estates unchallenged. She had no idea that every threat, every phony citation, every humiliation she handed out was about to come back on her. And this time, she wasn't facing a neighbor too afraid to speak up. She was facing me. Patricia's smug voice still rang in my ears as I walked into the HOA board session that evening. The meeting was held in the community hall, a low-ceilinged room lined with cheap folding chairs and framed photos of smiling families meant to project unity. In reality, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and every scrape of metal chair legs against tile sounded sharper than it should. Patricia sat at the front table, flanked by two board members who nodded like bobbleheads at everything she said. She looked relaxed, as if the outcome was predetermined. Her red blazer was pressed to perfection. A performance of control. My pulse beat steady in my throat, but I refused to let her see any weakness. When my case came up on the agenda, she barely glanced at the papers in front of her before raising her chin. Mr. Harris, the board has received multiple complaints regarding your non-compliant structure, she said, savoring each word like she was cutting meat. You've been warned. Removal must begin immediately. I leaned forward, keeping my voice even. That structure is a memorial to my father. It's not some eyesore, and you know it. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Personal sentiment doesn't exempt you from the rules. Before I could respond, I noticed him, Marcus Lyle. He sat 2 seats down from Patricia, shoulders hunched, fiddling with his pen. He avoided my eyes, but the tension in his jaw betrayed something. Unlike the others, he didn't nod when Patricia spoke. He looked like a man being crushed under invisible weight. Patricia continued, "If you fail to comply, fines will escalate daily. We'll pursue legal remedies if necessary." Her tone was dismissive, almost rehearsed. I kept my gaze steady on her, but allowed my voice to project across the room. Interesting how enforcement here always seems selective. Some neighbors get a pass, others get threats. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The bobbleheads shifted uneasily, but Patricia's smile froze. She turned a shade tighter, but didn't flinch. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Marcus swallow hard. His hand trembled slightly as he shuffled his notes. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. His eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, haunted, conflicted, and then dropped to the table. Patricia snapped her fingers on the tabletop. "We are not here to discuss board discretion. We're here because you're in violation." I leaned back in my chair. "Then maybe you should worry less about discretion and more about exposure." Her nostrils flared. She was used to neighbors folding by this stage, not pushing back. The silence stretched across the room. Even the ticking wall clock seemed louder. Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight. "Madam President, perhaps we should consider reviewing the consistency of enforcement." Patricia's head whipped toward him so fast the air seemed to shift. "That's out of order," she snapped. Her glare was sharp enough to cut. Marcus flinched, shoulders curling inward, but the damage was already done. The seed of hesitation had slipped into the room, and I saw it. He wasn't her loyal soldier, not entirely. I looked directly at him now, giving him space to meet my eyes if he dared. "Thank you, Marcus. At least someone on this board remembers the word fairness." He looked like he wanted to disappear. His pen tapped nervously against his folder, and his leg bounced under the table. But he didn't retract his words. That hesitation, that tiny fracture, was exactly what I needed to see. Patricia quickly moved to close the matter. "The board has ruled. Compliance is mandatory. Meeting adjourned." She slammed the gavel like a final warning shot. Chairs screeched as people stood. The crowd dispersed quickly, murmuring low. Patricia strode past me without a glance, her heels clicking sharp against the tile. But Marcus lingered behind, still seated, shoulders heavy. I didn't approach him. Not yet. I wanted him to sit with that moment, to feel the pull between loyalty and truth. Every second of his silence told me he carried more than he let on. And eventually, silence breaks. As I walked out of the hall into the cool night air, I knew one thing for certain. Patricia's grip on her board wasn't as tight as she thought. There were cracks, and I was going to widen them until the whole structure collapsed. Patricia didn't waste any time. The morning after that suffocating board session, I walked into my office downtown and found a white envelope waiting on my desk. It wasn't delivered by mail. Someone had dropped it off directly with the receptionist. My name was scrawled across the front in an exaggerated, almost theatrical cursive. I didn't have to open it to know whose hand had orchestrated it. Inside was a formal notice: failure to comply with community decency guidelines may result in daily fines, lien placement, or further enforcement action. The letter doubled down on their absurd demand about Sophia's shorts and added 2 new violations out of thin air: trash bins supposedly left out too long, and improper lawn edging. It was clear Patricia wanted to prove she was untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, the city skyline blurred beyond the glass. Patricia was no longer just picking at my family. She was daring me, on my own turf. My colleagues passed by the glass wall of my office, and a few slowed, eyeing the paper in my hand. I slipped it into a folder and waved them on. This wasn't their fight, not yet. Later that afternoon, I walked down the hall to grab coffee and found 2 board members waiting in the lobby. One of them, a man I recognized from the meeting, was leaning against the counter with the smugness of someone who thought he had power over me. The other scrolled his phone, clearly uncomfortable. They weren't here by coincidence. Patricia had sent them. "You should take the fines seriously," the smug one muttered as I walked past. His voice was low, but in a courthouse where words carry, it felt louder. "Nobody wins against the board." I stopped, turned, and locked eyes with him. His partner shifted uneasily, glancing at the floor. That hesitation told me everything. There were fractures in Patricia's circle. Not everyone liked how far she was taking things. I leaned closer, close enough that only the 2 of them could hear. "Nobody wins against the board? That's funny, because I am the one who enforces the law in this county." The smug one's smile faltered, just for a moment. He quickly covered it with a scoff, but the other man's jaw tightened. He looked like someone wrestling with his conscience. He muttered something about being late and walked out, leaving his partner behind. I watched him leave, filing that reaction away. A conflicted board member could be valuable. Patricia's iron grip wasn't as solid as she wanted everyone to believe. Back at my desk, I laid the new violation letter beside the first one. Patricia thought piling on fabricated infractions would pressure me into backing down. What she didn't understand was that escalation gave me leverage. It created a paper trail, a pattern of abuse that would be hard for her to justify under scrutiny. I picked up the phone and called a colleague in the civil division. I didn't give details, yet. I just asked her to keep her ear open for complaints about homeowner associations in our county. She agreed, curiosity piqued. I hung up, knowing I'd need every thread I could pull. As the sun set beyond the courthouse windows, the city lights flickered to life. I gathered the letters, slid them into my briefcase, and thought about Sophia. She'd gone to bed last night still asking if she had done something wrong. The shame Patricia had planted in her was taking root, and I couldn't let that continue. This wasn't about lawn edges or trash bins or even a pair of shorts. This was about power, who held it, and who dared to challenge it. Patricia had chosen to escalate. She thought threats would corner me. Instead, she'd just handed me proof of her abuse. I shut off my office light, the hum of the city carrying through the glass. Patricia wanted war. She was about to learn that I didn't pick fights, but I never walked away from them either. The next morning, I left the courthouse early and drove straight to the county library. It wasn't the kind of place Patricia or her cronies would ever bother with. That was exactly why I chose it. I needed space away from the constant pressure of the neighborhood, a place where my focus couldn't be interrupted by smug smiles or whispered threats. The hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet shuffle of pages felt almost medicinal after the chaos of the last few days. I signed into one of the public terminals and began searching through the county's online records. Most people don't realize how much of an HOA's authority hinges not on intimidation, but on what's actually filed with the state and county. Their entire framework exists only because of those documents. Patricia counted on fear. I trusted the law. Scrolling through incorporation papers and amendments, I felt my pulse steady, my mind shifting into that razor-sharp mode I used in court. Every file told a story. Dates, signatures, bylaws that had been quietly updated or carelessly ignored. I wasn't looking for dirt in the traditional sense. I was looking for cracks, legal ones. After an hour, I found it. A bylaw revision Patricia had pushed through 2 years ago, attempting to add a decency clause to enforce clothing rules in common spaces. On the surface, it looked official, but the problem was glaring. The amendment was never recorded with the county clerk. Without proper filing, it carried no enforceable authority. It was little more than a piece of paper Patricia waved around like a weapon. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, grim smile pulling at my face. This was the kind of overreach I lived for. Patricia hadn't just humiliated my daughter. She had done it using a rule that had no legal standing whatsoever. Still, I couldn't celebrate yet. I needed proof this wasn't a clerical fluke. I cross-referenced the filing records, flipping between scanned images and indexes. The decency clause appeared in HOA newsletters, but was conspicuously absent from official county amendments. That absence was my goldmine. If she tried to enforce it, she was effectively committing fraud against every homeowner. I printed the relevant pages, tucking them into a manila folder. The sound of the printer clicking away echoed like a drumbeat in the quiet room. Each sheet felt heavier than paper. It was leverage, plain and simple. Patricia had handed me the rope, and all I had to do was show the community how she was using it. As I gathered my things, I caught sight of an older man 2 tables over watching me. He had a stack of neighborhood newsletters in front of him, flipping through slowly. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod before returning to his reading. I didn't know if he lived in Oak Meadow or another HOA, but I recognized that look. He'd seen these games before. People like Patricia thrived because most neighbors felt powerless. That powerlessness ended with knowledge. Walking out into the crisp afternoon air, I clutched the folder tight. The discovery didn't just vindicate me, it made the fight urgent. Patricia was escalating because she thought she had the authority to do so. Once word spread that her so-called rule was hollow, her entire grip on the neighborhood would weaken. I thought of Sophia, how she had lowered her eyes when asking if she'd broken the rules. She deserved to know the truth, that she hadn't done anything wrong, and the people trying to shame her were standing on sand. As I slid into my car, I felt the resolve settle deeper into my chest. Patricia wanted me cornered, embarrassed, drained by fines and fear. Instead, I now held the evidence that her authority wasn't just flawed, it was illegitimate. The fight was no longer about whether I could stand against her. It was about how quickly I could expose her. And once that exposure happened, Patricia wouldn't be able to bully anyone in Oak Meadow again. The pool had always been Sophia's safe place. It was where her mother had taught her to swim, where summer afternoons were filled with laughter instead of loss. That's why it cut so deep when Patricia used that same place to humiliate her. I hadn't been back since that day, but something pulled me there now, a quiet insistence that I needed to see it with my own eyes before moving forward. The sun was sliding west when I walked through the gate. Chlorine hung sharp in the air, kids splashed at the shallow end, and the hum of cicadas droned in the background. For a moment, it almost felt normal, but then I saw Patricia. She stood near the diving board, clipboard in hand, her expression carved from smug authority. She wasn't watching her own kids, she was policing someone else's. A teenage boy in swim trunks was standing with his arms crossed, his mother at his side. Patricia was wagging a finger at them, voice loud enough to ripple across the water. Board policy states appropriate attire must be observed at all times. This is your warning, she declared. The mother's cheeks flushed red. He's wearing swim trunks. What's inappropriate about that? Patricia scribbled something on her clipboard. This will be noted. Fines escalate if there's repeat non-compliance. I stopped dead, fury boiling in my chest. I could see the same shame on that boy's face that I'd seen on Sophia's. It wasn't about shorts, swimsuits, or decency. It was about power. Patricia's need to wield it like a weapon, to remind everyone she was untouchable. I stepped closer, making sure she saw me. Her eyes flicked my way, and for just a second, her smile faltered. She remembered the board meeting. She remembered that I wasn't going to roll over. The boy's mother noticed me too, relief flashing in her eyes as if she'd just spotted backup. She didn't know me personally, but she recognized a lifeline when she saw one. Patricia, on the other hand, tightened her grip on the clipboard and pivoted. "Mr. Kane," she said, her tone icy. "I trust you received your updated violation notice." I let my gaze fall deliberately to the clipboard, then back to her. "I did, and I'll be addressing it soon." Her smirk returned, but it was thinner now, brittle at the edges. "See that you do. We can't have disorder in Oak Meadow." The words dripped with irony. Oak Meadow wasn't plagued by disorder. It was plagued by her. I watched her walk away, heels clicking against the concrete, the air around her thick with tension she pretended not to feel. The boy's mother exhaled, muttering thanks under her breath. I nodded, but my attention had already shifted. What I had just witnessed wasn't an isolated moment. It was proof that Patricia's fake rule was actively harming families. That changed everything. It wasn't enough to sit on my discovery, to hold it close like a card I'd play later. Every day Patricia enforced that phantom clause. More neighbors were humiliated, fined, or silenced. Sophia wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last, unless I acted now. I left the pool with my jaw set, the echoes of Patricia's voice chasing me through the evening air. I thought of Sophia again, how she had asked if she'd done something wrong. I thought of my wife, gone too soon, who had insisted that our daughter learn confidence in the water, not shame. Patricia was poisoning that memory, and I wasn't going to let her. By the time I reached my car, my decision was final. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was going on offense. The folder of records from the library wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. I was done waiting for Patricia's next move. The stakes weren't abstract anymore. They were my daughter's dignity, my wife's legacy, and the integrity of an entire neighborhood. I had the truth in my hands, and Patricia had handed me every reason to use it. Patricia believed she'd scared me into compliance. What she didn't realize was that she'd just lit the fire that would burn her whole facade down. Marcus's house sat at the far end of Oak Meadow, where the street bent into a quiet cul-de-sac. I hadn't expected him to call me, not after the way he'd kept his head down during the board meeting, but his text had been blunt. "Come by tonight." Alone. By the time I pulled up, dusk had settled. His garage door was open, the yellow light inside spilling across the driveway. The smell of motor oil and sawdust drifted out, a stark contrast to Patricia's manicured perfection. Marcus stood at a workbench, wiping his hands on a rag, shoulders tense. He looked like a man fighting with himself, even as he'd asked me here. "You came," he muttered without turning around. "I did," I said, stepping inside. "You asked." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of a small fan and the distant croak of frogs from the retention pond nearby. Marcus finally faced me, his jaw set, but his eyes restless. "You're poking a hornet's nest with Patricia," he said. "Most folks don't last long once she's decided to make an example out of them." I crossed my arms, waiting. He wasn't wrong, but he hadn't dragged me out here just to warn me. He sighed and tossed the rag onto the workbench. "You need to know something. That rule she's been waving around, the so-called decency clause, it's a sham. Never should have been enforced." I didn't flinch. I already had the records, but hearing it from someone inside the board carried a different weight. "Go on." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. His eyes darted to the open garage door, as if expecting Patricia herself to appear. Then he lowered his voice. She pushed it through in a board meeting that barely had quorum. 2 of us objected. We told her it needed to be recorded with the county clerk, but she didn't care. She sent out a newsletter like it was already law. And when no one challenged it, she started enforcing it. There it was, the confirmation I needed. Patricia wasn't just sloppy, she was deliberate. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. Marcus's shoulders sagged, the fight in him replaced by something closer to guilt. "Because I watched what she did to your daughter, and tonight at the pool, I heard she went after the Carson's boy too. It's wrong, Kane. I kept my mouth shut for too long, but I can't keep doing it." For a man like Marcus, admission wasn't easy. His reputation in Oak Meadow hinged on keeping peace, not taking sides. Yet here he was, breaking ranks. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to match his. "If you're serious about this, I need more than your word. I need records, minutes from that meeting, proof of how it went down." He hesitated, then reached under the workbench and pulled out a binder. It was scuffed and stained with grease, nothing like the pristine binders Patricia paraded at meetings. He slid it across the table. "Board minutes," he said. "I keep my own copies. Always have. Didn't trust Patricia to file them straight. You'll see the objections, the lack of quorum, it's all there." I rested my hand on the binder, the weight of it more symbolic than physical. This wasn't just insider information, it was the missing piece that turned my discovery into undeniable proof. Marcus leaned against the bench, looking at me with a mixture of relief and dread. "If she finds out I gave you that, I'm finished. She'll turn the whole board against me." I met his gaze. "Then she won't find out. Not until it's too late for her to spin it." For the first time that night, a flicker of a smile touched his face. It didn't last long, but it was enough. As I left his garage, the binder tucked under my arm, I felt the momentum shift. Patricia still thought she held the community in her grip. She didn't realize the cracks were widening, that her own allies were slipping away. Marcus had crossed the line tonight, and by doing so, he gave me the leverage to pull Patricia's entire facade down. The board might still look unified from the outside, but I knew better now. Their fortress had a breach, and I intended to walk right through it. The next morning, I set the binder Marcus had given me on my kitchen table and just stared at it. The edges were frayed, pages thick with notes, some written in his hurried scrawl. To anyone else, it might have looked like a stack of old paperwork, but to me, it was a weapon, one Patricia couldn't explain away with her polished speeches and smug smiles. I flipped it open and read the minutes from that fateful meeting. 2 board members absent, 1 arriving late and leaving early. Patricia had written her own version of "passed with majority consent," even though the tally showed otherwise. Marcus's notes in the margin told the real story. Objection raised, not recorded. My pulse quickened as I ran my finger over the words. She hadn't bent the rules, she had broken them. I slid the binder into my backpack and zipped it shut. It wasn't enough to sit on proof. I needed a stage, a moment when Patricia least expected resistance. And there was only one place where the entire neighborhood gathered without fail: the Saturday morning farmers market at the clubhouse lawn. Families bought coffee, kids chased each other near the playground, and Patricia made her rounds, acting like Oak Meadow's crowned queen. I spent the day preparing. I photocopied the minutes, highlighting the missing signatures, the lack of quorum, the objections conveniently erased. I cross-referenced the HOA bylaws against county code, making sure every detail was airtight. This couldn't be a messy outburst. I needed precision. By nightfall, I had everything laid out on my dining table, a neat stack of copies, each one a nail in Patricia's coffin. But as I looked at them, I knew something else was missing. A voice. Mine alone might not be enough to sway a crowd, not when Patricia had spent years painting me as the stubborn neighbor always looking for loopholes. I needed someone who'd lived under her thumb and was ready to break free. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Be careful. She's already asking questions about last night." I typed back, "Then we move faster. Mark it tomorrow. Can you stand with me?" His reply came slower this time. "If I do this, there's no going back." "Exactly," I sent. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Patricia's voice in my head, smooth, dismissive, dripping with condescension. But underneath that, I heard something else. The collective silence of neighbors who'd wanted to speak but never dared. Tomorrow, that silence would break. When dawn came, I dressed deliberately, Nothing flashy, just jeans and a plain button-down. I wanted no distraction, no excuse for Patricia to twist the narrative. I tucked the papers into my backpack and drove to the clubhouse. The lawn was already alive with motion, vendors setting up tents, neighbors milling around with reusable bags. The smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifted through the air. Patricia stood near the fountain, her clipboard in hand, laughing too loudly at something one of her board allies said. She hadn't noticed me yet. Good. I set up near the path that cut through the market, my backpack at my feet. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, looking like a man walking into court. He avoided Patricia's gaze, heading straight for me. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. I handed him a stack of the highlighted pages. "As sure as I've ever been. Once people see this, they won't unsee it." He swallowed hard, but nodded. "All right, let's do it." We waited until the market was at its busiest, when the hum of conversation filled the air and neighbors lingered near the fountain. That was when I stepped forward, binder in hand, and raised my voice just enough to carry. "Excuse me, everyone. I need 5 minutes of your time." Heads turned, conversations paused. Patricia's smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face before it hardened into suspicion. I held up the binder. "These are the official minutes from the HOA meeting where the so-called decency clause was supposedly passed, except it wasn't. Patricia knows it, Marcus knows it, and now, so will you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Patricia took a step forward, already opening her mouth to spin. But I wasn't giving her that chance. Not today. Patricia's heels clicked against the pavement as she cut through the crowd, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Daniel, enough of this circus. You don't have the authority to speak for this community, and waving around half-read notes doesn't change that." I kept my eyes on her, but I could feel the tension shifting. Neighbors leaned in, whispering, scanning the highlighted pages Marcus and I had begun passing out. The weight of silence pressed down, waiting to see who would falter first. I steadied my voice. "Authority? That's rich, Patricia. These minutes are your handwriting. You marked a motion as passed when only 2 members were present, and 1 left before the vote. That isn't a rule. That's fraud." A ripple ran through the crowd. Patricia laughed, a sharp, practiced sound. "Fraud? Please, if you're so convinced, take it to court. But while you posture, here I'll remind everyone that I've kept Oak Meadow thriving, kept property values high, and—" "By bullying kids," I cut in. My words landed heavier than I'd expected, the air tightening as parents glanced at Sophia and the other children circling the playground. Patricia's face flushed, but she pressed forward, trying to control the narrative. "This man has a personal vendetta," she declared, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "He can't accept that rules apply to everyone, even his daughter." Marcus shifted beside me, his shoulders tense. I saw him fight the urge to retreat, but then he cleared his throat. "That's not true." His voice was quieter than mine, but the crowd leaned closer, sensing something raw. Patricia whirled on him. "Marcus? Really? You'd side with him?" His hands shook as he lifted one of the copied minutes. "I was there. The vote didn't happen. Patricia pushed it through anyway. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was afraid of losing my seat, my standing. But Daniel's right. This clause isn't legitimate." Gasps broke out, louder this time. Patricia's veneer cracked, just a flicker, but I caught it. She barked a bitter laugh. "You expect them to believe you now, after sitting silent for months?" Marcus's voice steadied. "Yes, because silence doesn't erase the truth." For the first time, Patricia faltered. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The crowd pressed closer, papers rustling in their hands. Mothers exchanged uneasy glances. Fathers crossed their arms. Teenagers whispered, eyes wide. I seized the moment. Every single family here deserves better. You've been intimidated into silence, threatened with fines, shamed at meetings. But the truth is simple. Without a legitimate vote, Patricia's decency clause is unenforceable. She's been ruling on fear, not law. The hum of voices swelled. A father in a ball cap raised his voice. "So, what happens now?" I lifted the binder. "What happens now is accountability. And it starts with transparency. These documents are a public record. Anyone can request them from the county. I just did the legwork. You deserve to see how decisions are actually made." Patricia's cheeks burned crimson. This is reckless. You're undermining the very structure that protects your homes. You think buyers will want to move into a neighborhood where board members bicker in public? You're dragging us down. No, I said firmly. You already did that when you lied. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in voices overlapping, questions flying, frustration spilling out. Patricia tried to interject, but the tide had turned. Neighbors weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at each other, at me, at Marcus. I let the storm brew for a moment, then spoke above it. This isn't the end. We need more than proof. We need change. And that means voting, organizing, taking back the HOA from the people who abuse it. That starts here, with us. Eyes sharpened, nods spread. I saw resolve catching like fire. Patricia's lips trembled, but she clutched her clipboard tighter, clinging to the last shred of authority. I bent down, unzipped my backpack, and pulled out one last thing, a petition form, drafted the night before. I held it up. If you believe Oak Meadow deserves rules that are fair, transparent, and legal, sign this. Today. Patricia's voice cracked as she tried to shout over me, but her words were drowned by the sound of pens scratching on paper. The community center smelled faintly of varnish and dust, like old gym floors and forgotten banners. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows across the folding tables we dragged into a circle. It was late, the kind of late where most of Oak Meadow was asleep, but here in this hall, a different kind of energy hummed. Marcus spread copies of the meeting agenda across the table, his hands steady for the first time in weeks. She'll try to shut you down the second you bring up the clause, he said, his voice low but certain. That's her move. Control the floor, limit objections, declare you out of order. I nodded. And that's where she'll slip. The bylaws give homeowners the right to raise points of order. If she denies it, she's on record violating procedure. With everything we've documented, the county would laugh her out of court. The words steadied me, but I wasn't speaking for myself. Around me sat neighbors I'd never seen this determined. Quiet Linda from 2 doors down, who had spent years paying fines for her rose bushes. Greg, the contractor, his arms crossed like steel beams. Even teenagers, their sneakers tapping against the tile as they leaned in, hungry for change. Sophia curled up beside me on a folding chair, drowsy but refusing to be left at home. She traced the outline of the petition form with her finger, her voice soft. Daddy, will they stop being mean to me after this? I swallowed, my chest tightening. That's the plan, sweetheart. They won't tell you what to wear anymore. Her small hand slipped into mine, anchoring me more than all the law books and case notes ever could. Marcus cleared his throat. She still has allies. Don't underestimate them. Some of them are scared, but a few like the power. Then we give them a choice, I said. Stay silent and sync with her, or stand with the community and rebuild trust. Either way, tomorrow we force the issue. The petition sat in the middle of the table, already heavy with signatures. Neighbors flipped through the pages, whispering at the sheer number. It was more than paper. It was proof Patricia's grip was breaking. Greg leaned forward, his gravelly voice filling the room. I can bring my crew early, set up extra chairs. She'll expect 20 people, tops. Let's give her 50 staring her down. The room buzzed with approval. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore, or Patricia's petty crusade. It was about a neighborhood that had been cowed into silence finally finding its voice. I pulled a manila folder from my bag and slid it onto the table. Tomorrow, no theatrics. We stick to facts. Here are copies of the county's record of amendments. The decency clause isn't in there. We show it, calmly, clearly. Once the truth is out, the vote will follow. Linda's hands trembled as she picked up a sheet, scanning it with wide eyes. It's really not there, she whispered half to herself. No, I said, because Patricia never had the authority. Tomorrow, that becomes undeniable. The teenagers started folding petitions into neat stacks, ready to pass them out. Greg scribbled names on a sign-up sheet for volunteers to manage seating. Marcus rehearsed motions of order under his breath. Every detail mattered. Every move would be scrutinized. The weight of what was coming pressed on me, but beneath it was something else, momentum. This wasn't me standing alone against Patricia's machine anymore. This was a movement, fragile but growing. I looked around the circle, at tired faces lit by flickering fluorescent light, and spoke quietly. Tomorrow, we don't yell, we don't fight, we don't stoop to her level, we show them the truth, and we take back our neighborhood. Sophia squeezed my hand again, her eyelids heavy, but her voice clear. You're gonna win, Daddy. Her words weren't a question, they were a promise. I let the silence settle, the sound of pens scratching and papers shuffling filling the space. Tomorrow would be chaos, confrontation, maybe even betrayal. But tonight, in this small hall with its cracked linoleum and buzzing lights, I knew we were ready. The community center had never been this full. Rows of folding chairs pressed shoulder to shoulder, neighbors standing in the back, voices buzzing in uneasy anticipation. The fluorescent lights hummed above, but beneath them the air vibrated with something sharper, a hunger for answers. Patricia sat at the head table, flanked by two board members who looked more like bodyguards than colleagues. Her lips curved into that practiced smile she wore when she wanted to look unshaken. Though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the gavel, she struck it once, the crack echoing through the hall. This meeting of the Oak Meadow Homeowners Association is now in session. We'll begin with community concerns. Keep remarks brief. Before anyone else could rise, I stood, binder tucked under my arm, petition pages peeking from my bag. My voice cut through the chatter. I have a concern that affects every single family here. Dozens of heads turned. Patricia's smile faltered for a breath, then returned. Mr. Reeves, you've already wasted enough of this community's time. If this is about your daughter's dress code violation— It's not, I interrupted. The words came steady, measured. It's about a clause you claim gives you the right to control what our children wear, what plants we grow, even what cars we park in our driveways. But here's the truth. That clause doesn't exist. Gasps, whispers. Patricia's gavel came down hard. Out of order! You can't hijack this meeting for personal attacks. I stepped closer to the table, locking eyes with her. This isn't personal, it's procedural, and I'll prove it. Marcus rose from his chair near the front. His voice wavered but carried. He's right. I was on the board when Patricia forced that language through. There wasn't a quorum, no vote. I stayed silent, but silence doesn't make it legal. The room erupted. Patricia pounded the gavel again, but her control was slipping. Marcus, you of all people. I flipped open the binder and held a page high. These are the certified county records of every amendment ever filed by this HOA. The so-called decency clause is nowhere in them, which means every fine, every threat, every humiliation under that clause was nothing more than Patricia's abuse of power. Neighbors surged forward, craning to see. Some were already shaking their heads in disbelief, others muttering in anger. Linda, her hands trembling, shouted from the middle row, "You fined me $200 for roses. My husband skipped his medication that month to cover it." Patricia's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous. He's manipulating you with half-truths and theatrics. Property values depend on strong enforcement." "No," Greg's voice boomed from the back. "Property values depend on trust, and you've destroyed it." The gavel struck again, but its authority was gone. Voices drowned Patricia out, rising like a tide. I held up the petition, the stack thick with signatures. "This isn't just my fight. 50 of your neighbors signed today alone, demanding a vote to remove Patricia from the board. No more fear, no more bullying. We're taking back Oak Meadow." The crowd roared, not with applause, but with raw, furious agreement. Parents raised their hands. Teenagers chanted. Even the board members flanking Patricia leaned away, unwilling to be pulled down with her. Patricia slammed the gavel one last time. "This meeting is adjourned!" she shrieked. But no one left. No one listened. I stepped onto the small riser where she sat, voice clear above the chaos. "You don't get to decide that anymore. The community does. And tonight, Oak Meadow chooses truth over tyranny." For a heartbeat, silence held. Then the chant began, low at first, then swelling. "Vote, vote, vote." Patricia froze, gavel suspended in the air, her power evaporating under the weight of her own neighbors. And I knew then, tomorrow's vote wouldn't just be symbolic. It would be the end of her reign. The morning after the meeting, Oak Meadow felt different. The air seemed lighter, like the storm had finally broken. I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching Sophia draw chalk flowers across the walkway. The laughter in her voice was freer, No trace of the weight she'd carried these past weeks. For the first time in months, I could breathe without anger pressing down on my chest. Word had spread quickly. By dawn, emails from the board confirmed what the crowd had demanded. Patricia had resigned. Her closest allies backed away, unwilling to face the legal fallout of her decency clause. For years she'd ruled by intimidation, but last night proved that fear has a breaking point, and we had reached it. I didn't expect applause, but neighbors began trickling by anyway. Linda arrived first, clutching a small pot of roses like a peace offering. Her eyes glistened as she set it gently on the porch. "For you," she whispered, "for Sophia." Greg followed, his boots leaving heavy prints in the dew on my lawn. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, solid and unshakable. "You did it," he said, but I shook my head. "We did it." She only fell because enough people stood up. More neighbors gathered, some hesitant, others smiling with a relief that mirrored my own. The murmurs weren't about fines or warnings anymore. They were about block parties, repairs, the things a neighborhood should care about. For the first time, the HOA felt like it belonged to the community again. Marcus hung back at the edge of the street, arms folded, shame still heavy on his face. When our eyes met, he walked up slowly. "I should have spoken sooner," he admitted, voice low. "But if you hadn't pushed, I might never have found the courage." I studied him for a moment, then extended my hand. "What matters is, you did, and the community needed that." He shook it, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't just a conflicted witness anymore. He was an ally, maybe even a friend. Sophia bounded up the porch steps, chalk dust on her fingers. "Daddy, can I wear my shorts today?" she asked, half teasing. I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "You can wear whatever makes you happy. No one's ever going to tell you otherwise again." The symbolic weight of those words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about a dress code or a clause scribbled in a binder. It was about my daughter learning that bullies, no matter how official their titles, can be challenged and beaten. It was about reclaiming not just property rights, but dignity. The roses on the porch glowed in the morning sun, a reminder of why I fought. For memories, for legacy, for neighbors who had suffered in silence too long. Patricia thought she was untouchable, but rules without legitimacy are just empty threats, and truth has a way of cutting through even the sharpest lies. As the crowd outside my home grew, I stood and looked out at them, faces tired but hopeful, united in a way I hadn't seen since moving here. This victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Oak Meadow, and it would echo beyond this neighborhood. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. This is just the beginning. We're going to rebuild this board together, with fairness, transparency, and respect. No more secret votes, no more threats. From now on, Oak Meadow belongs to all of us. The cheers that followed weren't wild or chaotic. They were steady, confident, the sound of people reclaiming what had been taken from them. I turned back to Sophia, her smile brighter than the morning sun. In her eyes, I saw the legacy I wanted to leave, not just as a father, but as someone who refused to back down when justice mattered most. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.